For RCR Wireless News, I'm Catherine Speglia, and I'm joined today by Jonathan Harvey, Vice President of Portfolio Management for Nokia Core Networks. Hi, Jonathan. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks very much. It's my pleasure.
Why do we need a 5G standalone core in the first place? Like, what sort of benefits will it provide?
It's a really good question. So, because of course, I suppose there's a degree of cynicism sometimes that along comes another G. We've had 4G, we've had 5G NSA, here comes 5G SA. So what really do we get out of it? And it's interesting because there's a lot of stuff bundled into 5G standalone, which may not be immediately sort of obvious. So if I look at the core and what does it give us, essentially, I suppose if I take it from the top down, if I look at the use cases which we're having to deliver and which we're expecting to come from 5G, we're expecting to have low latency, high bandwidth, massive scale, and the core has got to support that. And some of that revolves around being able to deploy on top of any cloud platform, being able to push the core right out to the edge of the network. So, all the way out as close to the radio as possible. Being able to support any access mechanism. So, whether it is 5G mobile, whether it's fixed, whether there's various enterprise mechanisms, being able to support any access. Also being able to slice up the network. So, essentially saying, okay, I've got this big slice, which is enhanced mobile broadband. That's the big thing the mobile operators want to deploy. But what about, an industry application or a government application, public safety, things like that, being able to slice the network into very specific sort of domains and deliver those with separate quality of service, separate latency and everything else. And then I suppose the other big one is, and this is quite fundamental in the architecture, is we're moving to this service-based architecture. And that allows us to expose the network to the outside world, to third parties. It allows us to be far more open. So we can sort of plug and play far better and open it up to more sort of advanced use cases, which are coming in from outside of the network itself, basically. So at a summary, I would say, those are the sort of the high level elements which we deliver with a 5G SA core.
And how does the industry get there? What needs to be in place for the evolution to the 5G standalone core?
So everyone's coming from a different starting point, I suppose. So, and really, when we look at 5G standalone, you can look at it from two different angles, either a sort of an evolutionary approach from what you have in place today, or a sort of an overlay, almost a revolutionary approach. On the evolution side of things, what we're essentially saying is, if you take Nokia, for example, and you already have Nokia 4G and 5G NSA networks in place, you would evolve those. It's a software upgrade, essentially, to bring in the new elements. So various functions like our sort of subscriber data management platform. Today it supports 3G and 4G. With a software upgrade, it will support 5G moving forward. So that's more of an evolutionary approach. There's obviously the overlay type model as well, which is saying, okay, I have a network in place, but I want to take a different approach to 5G standalone. So effectively, I bring in new network elements and I overlay them over the top of my existing network. Now, certainly from our perspective, we support both approaches, and you could almost say our core network is built around a sort of a triple mode model where we support 4G, 5G NSA, 5G SA, and with a single network function, you can support any of those three models. Alternatively, you can just do 5G SA. The other thing you need to have in place, and this is sort of different to 4G, I suppose, is that it's cloud-based. So in 4G, we see physical network functions. We see people evolving through to virtualized network functions, so VNFs, and we see now cloud-native functions, so CNFs. In 5G, it's very much cloud focused. So it isn't an option anymore. You can't really deploy 5G on physical network functions. It needs to be cloud-based. And so depending on where your starting point is, depends whether effectively you're just evolving your existing platform, maybe having to cloudify it, or whether you're bringing in a new cloud-based 5G standalone platform.
Let's talk about the private versus public cloud conversation as it relates to the 5G core. Why might a service provider choose to deploy in a public cloud?
I think this is the hot one right now. This is the hot topic everyone wants to talk about. And, if I look at, all of my discussions with operators, it's really, everyone's got a different view on this. Everyone's got a different angle. We see the hyperscalers, sort of Google, AWS, Microsoft moving into the mobile network space. It's interesting. I mean, I don't think it's really private versus public, because there are some serious challenges with deploying a core network on top of public today, because there's all sorts of regulatory, privacy, security issues related to taking the core with all the user data and pushing it right out onto a public cloud. It's more related to the platform itself, and we're seeing the public cloud providers, the hyperscalers, moving to on-prem deployment. So I think something like Google Anthos, AWS Outpost, things like this. And certainly we're seeing the initial deployments. I mean, we have we have Dish in the US deploying today a Nokia core on top of AWS. We have Telenet in Belgium deploying a Nokia core on top of Google Anthos. And so these are the first sort of probes into that sort of model. It really varies depending on the operator. It's initially we're seeing, they've got to make a decision between, do I build my own cloud? Do I take a cloud off the vendor? Or do I effectively bring in one of these hyperscalers to look after the cloud for me? And there's lots of different angles, from a commercial perspective and a deployment perspective. Certainly from our perspective, and this goes back to the discussion about the 5G SA core, we're having to support any cloud. So we're having to build cloud native network functions, which will run on top of our own platform, so our own NCS sort of Kubernetes platform, or on top of the operator's cloud, whether they've used something like Red Hat OpenShift or something like that, or on top of the hyperscalers. And we're seeing a real mix in the marketplace right now. There's no dominant model, and we're having to support everything. And I think the market's in a little bit of a wait and see position to see, what will be dominant, or if anything will be dominant. And of course, what's coming then also is SaaS, so software as a service, and network as code, which is sort of the evolutionary approach for that. And there, again, you can see, being able to deploy onto a public type cloud, hyperscaler type cloud would be interesting from a multi-tenancy sort of SaaS type model as well.
All right, Jonathan, thanks so much for your time.
That was nice and painless. Thanks very much.